Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are unpacking a really fascinating geopolitical and spiritual philosophy. We're going to look at a highly unique framework that takes the modern world, its nations, its conflicts, its demographics, and maps it all directly onto the anatomy of a giant living tree. It's an intricate, wildly different perspective that attempts to explain human history and our global future entirely through the lens of nature.
Here's how we're going to break this down today. First, a single tree forming the world. Second, the roots of the tree, the Korean Peninsula. Third, the trunk of the tree, China. Fourth, branches and breakwater, the West and Japan. Fifth, one match for 100, and the law of population. And finally, sixth, the path of the great, co-prosperity of mankind.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, a single tree forming the world. This is the foundational premise for everything we're about to discuss.
Think about it. What if nations aren't just isolated entities separated by arbitrary borders, but deeply linked parts of a single global ecosystem? Imagine the entire Earth functioning as one massive tree. In this framework, the fate of one single person connects directly to 100 others, and the speaker emphasizes that this isn't just nice poetry. It's meant to be a literal blueprint of how energy, culture, and power flow across the globe. By understanding the anatomy of this tree, the source argues we can understand exactly why certain nations act the way they do today.
Moving right along to Section 2, the roots of the tree, focusing on the Korean Peninsula. Let's see how this builds our understanding of this specific region's role.
Okay, so in this massive global tree metaphor, the Korean Peninsula represents the literal roots. The source refers to the people here as heavenly descendants. Now, what does a root actually do? Well, it anchors the tree, sure, but more importantly, it generates the core life force. According to the speaker, the primary function of these roots is to generate the core cultural and spiritual energy required to nourish the rest of the world. So it's not about manufacturing physical goods, right? It's about producing the profound original paradigms that humanity needs in order to evolve.
Next up, Section 3, the trunk of the tree, China. Moving up from the roots, we encounter this massive conductive force.
So there's a really strict division of labor going on here. The lecturer neutrally posits that China's historical and modern role is strictly conductive. Basically, the trunk's job is just to move energy between the roots and the branches. Unlike the roots, the trunk is described as being completely unable to produce new cultural paradigms natively. It is undeniably massive and powerful, but its core function in this philosophy is transportation and absorption, absolutely not original creation.
And honestly, this is where the perspective on current global tensions gets super interesting. When energy, like say modern technology, travels up through the trunk just naturally absorbs it. The source actually uses this incredibly vivid metaphor of a dead log that sprouts mushrooms strictly from the energy passing through it. In this view, China's technological strategies and the resulting geopolitical pushback from alliances led by countries like the US are just natural, predictable mechanics. The pushback isn't seen as an attempt to destroy the trunk, because obviously a tree needs its trunk to survive, but simply to limit its natural tendency to absorb too much passing energy.
That brings us to Section 4, branches and breakwater, looking at the West and Japan. This is where we examine the outer elements of our global ecosystem. Out on the edges, the source outlines that the West functions as the branches. These branches conduct photosynthesis. They take that core energy from the roots and use it to create visible growth and technology. However, the speaker argues the branches are currently in a holding pattern, just waiting for a brand new cultural energy from the roots to achieve true world peace because technology alone just isn't going to cut it. Meanwhile, Japan serves a highly specific protective function as a breakwater. The source claims that over immense geological time, tectonic shifts specifically place the Japanese archipelago exactly where it is to shield the roots, the Korean Peninsula, from the harsh, destructive waves of the Pacific Ocean.
Now here is a truly fascinating claim. The source argues that Japan, acting as this natural breakwater, actually relies on exported Korean philosophy to function at all. It specifically mentions that Japan operates on Toge philosophy, referring to a highly prominent Korean Confucian scholar. The overarching argument is that Japan's future survival and prosperity depend entirely on cooperating with and protecting the roots. If the breakwater turns against the roots, the framework suggests it's literally defying its own natural purpose.
All right, shifting gears a bit for Section 5, one match for 100 and the law of population. Let's look at the striking mathematical claims in this philosophy. You've probably heard the traditional phrase Ildangbaek, which usually just means being a match for 100 opponents. Well, the speaker takes this completely literally here. They propose an exact non-negotiable mathematical law governing human populations and how they interconnect. The idea is that every single person living in the roots is directly tied to exactly 100 people in the rest of the world.
And the crucial point is how this exact ratio scales up to a global level. The speaker argues that nature meticulously mirrors the root population. To put that into perspective, when the population of the Korean peninsula reached 30 million, the global population was 3 billion. When it hit 70 million, the world reached 7 billion. The source even points out that domestic policy shifts in the roots echo worldwide. Like, when family planning and birth control policies were rolled out in the roots to slow population growth, similar massive population control policies naturally followed in countries like China. It's presented as this flawless, completely natural synchronicity.
And finally, Section 6, The Path of the Great, Co-Prosperity of Mankind. This is the ultimate thesis and the big call to action.
According to the source, if the roots want to avoid major hardship, the people there absolutely must step up and fulfill their natural duty. They are urged to reject any petty, narrow-minded behavior and become a great person, or a day in. This means stepping back and taking on a truly macroscopic perspective. Rather than fighting incoming influences, they have to absorb and embrace them all. The speaker stresses that it is time to stop focusing solely on one's immediate family, or even just one's nation. Instead, the roots have to pool their strength to generate that brand new cultural paradigm the branches are so desperately waiting for, with the ultimate goal being the co-prosperity of mankind.
So here is the big takeaway from this explainer. Regardless of whether you buy into the literal 1 to 100 math or the highly specific mappings of roots, trunks, and branches, this framework challenges us on a really deep level. It forces us to consider our collective responsibility in a deeply, undeniably interconnected world. If our actions truly ripple out to affect hundreds of others, are we acting as petty individuals, or are we striving to be the great persons our global ecosystem so desperately needs? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I'll leave you to ponder that vital question.